المقيم الذي لا زوال له ولا يضمحلان بعد أن شرطت عليهم زهدا في درجات هذه الدنيا الدنيا وزخرفها وزبرجها فشرطوا لك ذلك وعلمت منهم الوفاء به فقبلتهم وقربتهم وقدمت لهم الذكر العلية والثناء الجلية وأحببت عليهم ملائكتك وكرمتهم بوحيك ورفضتهم بعلمك وجعلتهم الذريعة إليك والوسيلة إلى رضوانك فبعض أسكنته جنتك إلى أن أخرجته منها وبعض حملته في فلكك ونجيته ومن آمن معه من الحلكة برحمتك وبعضا اتخذته لنفسك خليلا وسألك لسان صدق في الآخرين فأجبته وجعلت ذلك عليا وبعض كلمته من شجرة تكريما وجعلت له من أخيه ردءا ووزيرا وبعضا أولدته من غير أب وآتيته البينات وأيدته بروح القدس وكل شرعت له شريعة ونهجت له منهاجا وتخيرت له أوصياء مستحفظا بعد مستحفظ من مدة إلى مدة إقامة لدينك وحجة على عبادك ولئلا يزول الحق عن مقره ويغلب الباطل على أهله ولا يكون أحد لولا أرسلت إلينا رسولا منذرا وأقمت لنا علما هاديا فنتبع آيتك من قبل أن نضل ونخزى إلى أن انتهيت بالأمر إلى حبيبك ونجيبك محمد صلى الله عليه وآله فكان كما أنت جبته سيد من خلقته وسقط من استفيته وأفضل من اجتبيته وأكرم من اعتمدته قدمته على أنبيائك وبعثته إلى الثقلين من عبادك وأوتعته مشارقك ومغاربك وسخرت له البراق وأرجت بروحه إلى السماء وأودعته علم ما كان وما يكون إلى انقضاء خلقك ثم نصرته بالرعب وحففته بجبرائيل وميكائيل والمسومين من ملائكتك ووعدته أن تظهر دينه على الدين كله ولو كره المشركون وذلك بعد أن بوأته مبوأ صدق من أهله وجعلت له ولهم أول بيت وضع للناس الذي ببكة مباركة وهدى للعالمين فيه آيات بينات مقام إبراهيم ومن دخله كان آمنا وقلت إنما يريد الله ليذهب عنكم الرجس أهل البيت ويطهركم تطهيرا ثم جعلت أجر محمد صلواتك عليه وآله مودتهم في كتابك فقلت قل لا أسألكم عليه أجرا إلا المودة في القربى وقلت ما سألتكم من أجر فهو لكم وقلت ما أسألكم عليه من أجر إلا من شاء أن يتخذ إلى ربه سبيلا فكانوا هم السبيل إليك والمسلك إلى رضوانك فلما انقضت أيامه أقام وليه علي بن أبي طالب صلواتك عليهما وآلهما هاديا إذ كان هو المنذر ولكل قوم حاج فقال والملأ أمامه من كنت مولاه فعلي مولاه اللهم وال من والاه وعاد من عاداه وانصر من نصره واخذل من خذله. وقال من كنت أنا نبيه فعلي أميره وقال أنا وعلي من شجرة واحدة وسائر الناس من شجر شتى. وأحله محل هارون من موسى فقال له أنت مني بمنزلة هارون من موسى إلا أنه لا نبي بعدي. وزوجه ابنته سيدة النساء العالمين وأحل له من مسجده ما حل له وسد الأبواب إلا بابه ثم أودعه علمه وحكمته فقال أنا مدينة العلم وعلي بابها فمن أراد المدينة والحكمة فليأتها من بابها. ثم قال أنت أخي ووسي ووارثي لحمك من لحمي ودمك من دمي وسلمك سلمي وحربك حربي والإيمان مخالط لحمك ودمك كما خالط لحمي ودمي وأنت غدا على الحوض خليفتي وأنت تقضي ديني وتنجز عداتي وشيعتك على منابر من نور مبيضة وجوههم حولي في الجنة وهم جيراني. ولولا أنت يا علي لم يعرف المؤمنون بعدي وكان بعده هدى من الضلال ونورا من العمى وحبل الله المتين وصراطه المستقيم لا يسبق بقرابة في رحم ولا بسابقة في الدين ولا يلحق في منكبة من مناقبه يحذو حظ الرسول صلى الله عليهما وآلهما ويقاتل على التأويل ولا تأخذهم في الله نومة لائم وقد وتر فيه سناديد العرب وقتل أبطالهم وناوش ذعبانهم فأودع قلوبهم أحقادا بدرية وخيبرية وهنينية وغيرهن فأضبت على عداوته وأكبت على منابذته حتى قتل الماكثين والقاسطين والمارقين. ولما قضى نحبه وقتله أشكى الآخرين يتبع أشكى الأولين لم يمتثل أمر رسول الله صلى الله عليه وآله في الهادين بعد العادين والأمة مصرة على مقته مجتمعة على قطيعة الرحم وإقصاء ولده إلا القليل ممن وفى لرعاية الحق فيهم فقتل من قتل وسبي من سبي وأقصي من أقصي وجرى القضاء لهم بما يرجى له حسن المثوبة إذ كانت الأرض لله يورثها من يشاء من عباده والعاقبة للمتقين وسبحان ربنا إن كان وعد ربنا لمفعولا ولن يخلف الله وعده وهو العزيز الحكيم. فعلى الأطايب من أهل محمد وعلي صلى الله عليهما وآلهما فليبكي الباكون وإياهم فليندب النادبون ولمثلهم فلتذرف الدموع وليصرخ الصارخون ويضج الضاجون ويعج العاجون أين الحسن أين الحسين أين أبناء الحسين صالح بعد الصالح وصادق بعد الصادق أين السبيل بعد السبيل أين الخيرة بعد الخيرة أين شموس ضالعة أين الأقمار المنيرة؟ أين أنجم الظاهرة؟ أين أعلام الدين وقواعد العلم؟ أين بقية الله التي لا تخلو من العترة الهادية؟ أين المعد لقطع دابر الظلمات؟ أين المنتظر لإقامة الأمت والعوج؟ أين المرتجى لإزالة الجور والعدوان؟ أين المدخر لتجديد الفرائض والسنن؟ أين المتخير لإعادة الملة والشريعة؟ أين مؤمل لإحياء الكتاب وحدوده؟ أين محيي معالم الدين وأهله؟ أين قاسم الشوكة المعتدين؟ أين هادم أمنية الشرك والنفاق؟ أين المبيد الأهل الفسوق والإسيان والطغيان؟ أين حاسد فروع الغي والشقاق؟ أين طامس آثار الزيغ والأهواء؟ أين قاطع حبائل الكذب والافتراء؟ أين مبيد العتاة والمرضى؟ أين المستأصل أهل العناد والتضليل والإلحاد؟ أين المعز الأولياء ومضل الأعداء؟ أين جامع الكلمة على التقوى؟ أين باب الله الذي منه يؤتى؟ أين وجه الله الذي إليه يتوجه الأولياء؟ أين السبب المتصل بين الأرض والسماء؟ أين صاحب يوم الفتح وناشر الراية الهدى؟ أين المؤلف شمل الصلاح والرضا؟ أين طالب بذهول الأنبياء وأبناء الأنبياء؟ أين الطالب بدم المقتول بكربلاء؟ أين المنصور على من اعتدى عليه وافترى؟ أين المضطر الذي يجاب إذا دعا؟ أين صدر الخلائق ذو البر والتقوى؟ أين ابن النبي المصطفى وابن علي المرتضى وابن خديجة الغراء وابن فاطمة الكبرى؟ بأبي أنت وأمي ونفسي لك الوقاء والحمى، يا ابن السادة المقربين، يا ابن النجباء الأكرمين، يا ابن الهداة المهديين، يا ابن الخيرة المحذبين، يا ابن الخطارفة الأنجبين، يا ابن الأطايب المطهرين، يا ابن الخضارمة المنتجبين، يا ابن القماقمة الأكرمين، يا ابن البذور المنيرة، يا ابن السرج المضيئة، يا ابن الشهب الثاقبة، يا ابن الأنجم الزاهرة، يا ابن السبل الواضحة، يا ابن الأعلام اللائحة، يا ابن العلوم الكاملة، يا ابن السنن المشهورة، يا ابن المعالم المعثورة، يا ابن المعجزات الموجودة، يا ابن الدلائل المشهودة، يا ابن الصراط المستقيم، يا ابن النبأ العظيم، يا ابنه من هو في أم الكتاب لدى الله علي حكيم، يا ابن الآيات والبينات، يا ابن الدلائل الظاهرات، يا ابن البراهين الواضحات الباهرات، يا ابن الحجج البالغات، يا ابن النعم السابغات، يا ابن طه والمحكمات، يا ابن ياسين والضاريات، يا ابن تور والعاديات، يا ابن من دنا فتدلى فكان قاب قوسين أو أدنى دنوا واقترابا من العلي الأعلى. ليت شعري أين استقرت بك النوى، بل أي أرض تكلك أو ثرى، أبي رضوى أو غيرها أم ذي توى، عزيز علي أن أرى الخلق ولا ترى، ولا أسمع لك حسيسا ولا نجوى. عزيز علي أن تحيط بك دوني البلوى، ولا ينالك مني ضجيجا ولا شكوى. بنفسي أنت من مغيب لم يخلو منا، بنفسي أنت من نازه ما نزه عنا. بنفسي أنت أمنية الشائق يتمنى، من مؤمن ومؤمنة ذكر فحنا. بنفسي أنت أقيل إز لا يسامى، بنفسي أنت من أثيل مجد لا يجارى. بنفسي أنت من تلاد نعم لا تضاهى، بنفسي أنت من نسيف شرف لا يساوى. إلى متى أحار فيك يا مولاي، وإلى متى وأي خطاب أسف فيك وأي نجوى. عزيز علي أن أجاب دونك وأناغى، عزيز علي أن أبكيك ويقبلك الورى. عزيز علي أن يجري عليك دونهم ما جرى. هل من معين فأطيل معه العويل والبكاء، هل من جزء فأساعد جزأه إذا خلا. هل قضيت عين فساعدتها عيني على القضاء. هل إليك يا ابن أحمد سبيل فتلقى. هل يتصل يومنا منك بإدة فنحظى. متى نرد مناهلك الروية فنروى. متى ننتقئ من أب مائك فقد طال الصدى. متى نغاديك ونراوحك فنقر عينا. متى ترانا ونراك وقد نشرت اللواء النصر. ترانا نحف بك وأنت تؤم الملأ. قد ملأت الأرض عدلا وأذقت أعداءك هوانا وعقابا. وعبرت الأتاة وجحدت الحق وقطعت دابر المتكبرين واجتثثت أصول الظالمين. ونحن نقول الحمد لله رب العالمين. اللهم أنت كشاف الكرب والبلوى، وإليك أستعدي فعندك العدوى. وأنت رب الآخرة والدنيا فأغث يا غياث المستغيث عبيدك المبتلى. وعليه سيده يا شديد القوى، وأزل عنه به العسى والجوى. وبرد غليله يا من على العرش استوى، ومن إليه رجع والمنتهى. اللهم ونحن عبيدك التائقون إلى وليك المذكر بك وبنبيك، خلقته لنا عصمة وملاذا، وأقمته لنا قواما ومآذا، وجعلته للمؤمنين منا إماما، فبلغه منا تحية والسلاما. وزدنا بذلك يا رب إكراما، واجعل مستقره لنا مستقرا ومقاما. واتمم نعمتك بتقديمك إياه أمامنا حتى توردنا جنانك ومرافقة الشهداء من خلصائك. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد، وصل على محمد جده ورسولك السيد الأكبر، وعلى أبيه سيد الأصغر، وجدته صديقة الكبرى فاطمة بنت محمد صلى الله عليه وآله، وعلى من استفيت من آبائه البررة، وعليه أفضل وأكمل وأتم وأدوم وأكثر وأوفر ما صليت على أحد من أسفيائك وخيرتك من خلقك. وصل عليه صلاة لا غاية لعددها ولا نهاية لمددها ولا نفاد لأمدها. اللهم وأقم به الحق وأدحض به الباطل وأذل به أولياءك واذلل به أعداءك وسل اللهم بيننا وبينه وصلة تؤدي إلى مرافقة سلفه واجعلنا ممن يأخذ بحجزتهم ويمكث في ذلهم وعنا لا تعدية حقوقه إليه والاجتهاد في طاعته واجتناب معصيته وامن علينا برضاه وهب لنا رأفته ورحمته ودعاءه وخيره ما ننال به سعة من رحمتك وفوزا عندك واجعل صلاتنا به مقبولا وذنوبنا به مغفورا ودعاءنا به مستجابا واجعل أرزاقنا به مبسوطا وهمومنا به مطفيا وحوائجنا به مقضيا واقبل إلينا بوجهك الكريم واقبل تقربنا إليك وانظر إلينا نظرة رحيمة نستكمل بها كرامة عندك ثم لا تصرفها عنا بجودك واسقنا من حوض جده صلى الله عليه وآله بكأسه وبيده ريان رويا هنيئا سائغا لا ظمأ بعده يا أرحم الراحمين.
اللهم صل على
بعد استرسال 2 ركعات صلاة قضاء الحاجة دعاء المنبر كلنا ندعو الله.
بسم الله بسم الله الرحمن بسم الله اللهم صل على
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. لا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله. توكلت على الحي الذي لا يموت، والحمد لله الذي لم يتخذ صاحبة ولا ولدا، ولم يكن له شريك في الملك، ولم يكن له ولي من الذل، وكبره تكبيرا. الله أكبر، الله أكبر، الله أكبر، الله أكبر. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. جل جلاله. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. جل جلاله. أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله. أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله. على محمد. أشهد أن مولانا أمير المؤمنين عليا ولي الله صلوات الله وسلامه. أشهد أن مولانا أمير المؤمنين عليا حجة الله صلوات الله وسلامه. حي على الصلاة، حي على الصلاة. حي على الفلاح، حي على الفلاح. حي على خير العمل. حي على خير العمل. الله أكبر، الله أكبر. لا إله إلا الله لا إله إلا الله وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وآله وسلم.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله على محمد وأهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين صلوات على محمد وآل محمد اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. Respected elders, brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Alhamdulillah again for the tawfiq of the day of Friday, the first of the day of the month of November, that we have the opportunity to sit together and to learn from the Quran and to continue our discussion around Surah Al-Qiyamah, the 75th chapter of the Holy Quran. Last week we finished our discussion around the 13th verse in which Allah says, يُنَبَّأُ الْإِنسَانُ يَوْمَئِذٍ بِمَا قَدَّمَ وَأَخَّرَ, that on that day man will be informed about what works he had sent ahead and what he had left behind. And we discussed some of the various meanings on this verse, but the reason of mentioning the previous verse is it ties into the next verse of discussion, in which Allah says, بَلِ الْإِنسَانُ عَلَى نَفْسِهِ بَصِيرًا. In the 14th verse that we begin our discussion with today, Allah points and He says, indeed man is a witness to himself. Previous verse, Allah is saying that we'll announce to man, we'll tell man of the actions that he performed and what he did before and what he sent ahead. Here Allah is saying there's no need for us to announce, rather the fact that man is a witness against himself, and man himself knows what he has done. Allah mentions this in other verses as well too. For example, in Surah Al-Isra, also in verse number 14 there, Allah makes the statement, كَفَى بِنَفْسِكَ الْيَوْمَ عَلَيْكَ حَسِيبًا. Sufficient is yourself today against you as an accountant. This verse, in explaining to us, talks about the aspect of saying that we ourselves are well aware of the actions that we perform and the consequences that they bear, and that we ourselves will know of what we did and what was our actions and our good deeds and our misdeeds, such that we won't need to hear it from anyone else. Rather, in some of the riwayat, it mentions that it goes so far as to say that when it will be announced to you, you will say, please don't tell me I know. Please don't expose me, I know. And I know what I've done. That it's not that man will be ignorant of his actions and what is worthy of punishment and what is worthy of reward. We see in one of the narrations from our sixth Imam Ja'far ibn Muhammad as-Sadiq alayhi salam, when this verse would be recited before him, بَلِ الْإِنسَانُ عَلَى نَفْسِهِ بَصِيرًا, Imam would explain and he says, what use is it to make excuses to people knowing that Allah sees beyond the excuses? And that the Holy Prophet used to say, whoever keeps a secret intention, meaning hides his purpose of action, Allah will clothe him in the outcome of that conclusion of what his secret intention was. If it is good, then he will receive goodness. And if it is evil, then Allah will expose his evil. Meaning that the true intention with which we perform an action is what truly gives us a reward or a punishment. In another tradition, we see that when Zurara asks our sixth Imam about this condition, he asks him an interesting question that ties this verse actually back to fiqh and Islamic law and how we understand Islamic law. One of the questions that Zurara asks the sixth Imam, he says, Yabna Rasulullah, he says, there is a rule in Islam that if you feel sick, you can break your fast. What is the extent of that illness that if a person feels it, they can break their fast? And Zurara replies that in reply to my question, at what point in time is sickness enough? The Imam replied with this verse, بَلِ الْإِنسَانُ عَلَى نَفْسِهِ بَصِيرًا, explaining and saying that the human being is a witness against himself and knows what he can bear. This is an explanation for us, that one of the explanations of this is to say that, for example, when we look for an excuse in the rules of Islam, and we look for an excuse to escape the commands of Allah, and we look for a way out of the obligations that we have, Truly, we're not getting away with anything. Allah knows truly what we are capable of, which is why, for example, in concepts like the term haraj, harm that comes to a person through an action, and daf'il haraj, meaning prevention of harm coming to a person, is one of the fundamental principles of the rules of Islam, that nothing in Islam that, for example, like fasting, is intended to cause you haraj and harm. You make that decision of where that harm exists, because you yourself will be the witness against yourself to say that, oh Allah, was I true with you? Was I sincere with you? Or did I look for an excuse and the way out of your command? So this verse, بَلْ إِنسَانُ عَلَى نَفْسِهِ بَصِيرًا, is an explanation of both things. One, the day of judgment, and that on the day of judgment we will know our own affairs well enough that we won't need to hear our book of deeds. We'll be able to read it ourselves and announce what it is that we did and how we behaved. And two, that in this world, if we have a command from Allah to perform an action, and we look for an excuse and a way out, the reality is Allah is well aware and we are well aware, and our secret intentions Allah will know and make public to us in our own affairs, such that there's nothing that we get away from. There are other points in the Quran where Allah mentions similar themes as well too, that more than anyone else being a witness against you, that you yourself will speak against you. For example, when we look in Surah Al-Fussalat, verse number 20, their hearing and their eyes and their skin shall testify against them as to what they used to do. Meaning it's no third person that will announce to Allah that, oh Allah, this person did X, Y, and Z, but rather ourselves that will speak against us. In Surah Yasin, verse 65, in a famous verse that we recite, we say that this day we shall seal upon their mouths, and their hands shall speak to us, and their legs shall bear witness as to what they used to do. These verses tell us that on the day of judgment, don't imagine that there is, for example, a prosecutor that stands against you, a prosecutor who sits there and tries to expose your sin and you try to hide it. Rather, Allah is describing the condition of the day of judgment is such that you are the witness against yourself. You are the one who bears witness to the good and evil, and you are the one who is well aware of what it is that you did. And at that point in time, excuses will not help you. Allah continues this theme in saying, وَلَوْ أَلْقَى مَعَاذِيرَهُ, and you will be the witness against yourself, وَلَوْ أَلْقَى مَعْذِيرَهُ, even though you will offer excuses to justify your failings and shortcomings. The kalimatil ma'adhir, or excuses, it refers to an excuse that prevents a person from fulfilling the expected action. And it's not just a wasteful statement that you'll be making. No, you'll be offering legitimate excuses to kind of remove your liability of fulfilling these responsibilities that Allah put upon you. But that, it won't be beneficial to you. Ma'adhira, another word for it is a curtain. So one of the explanations of this verse says, وَلَوْ أَلْقَى مَعَاذِرَ, that you will be the witness against yourself, but you'll try to put curtains in front of your actions to try and hide what you were actually doing and what happened, and try to come up with excuses, but it won't be beneficial to you in that moment. The significance of statements like this is believing in the truth and veracity of Allah's claims that there is a day of accounting, and on that day of accounting, nothing will be hidden. When Allah tells us that if you did an atom's weight of good, you'll receive the benefit, and an atom's weight of evil, and you'll see the punishment for it, is an explanation of saying that there's no way to hide any of this fact, that everything is in absolute truth. Verse 16 continues this theme and conversation, وَلَا تُحَرِّقْ بِهِ لِسَانَكَ لِتَعْجَلْ بِهِ. Here, this verse begins either one, a new series of conversation, or in some interpretations, a continuation of the conversation. Verse number 16 says, وَلَا تُحَرِّقْ بِهِ لِسَانَكَ لِتَعْجَلْ بِهِ. Do not move your tongue with the intention to hasten it. Some of the Mufassirin point to and turn back to that this is a conversation referring to the act of our Holy Prophet Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. That it's an instruction to the Prophet, don't be hasty, don't be in a rush to convey the message of the Quran. Other interpreters, there's up to 4 interpretations of this verse. The first takes a look at Surah Taha, verse number 114, where Allah makes a similar statement where He says, be not in haste with the recitation of the Quran before its revelation is completed to you. That verse would talk about the idea that because Rasulullah possessed the entirety of the Quran in himself that was given to him on the night of Qadr, he would want to give people the Quran and give them the advices of the Quran before Allah indicated and sent Jibreel to tell the people that this is the verse, this is the time to reveal it to them. And that our Prophet would want to give as much guidance as he could as quickly as possible. In that vein, some Mufassirin have looked at this verse, لا تحرك به لسانك لتعجل به, that don't move your tongue with it to hasten it, to be quick with the recitation and reciting of these verses. Don't do that. Other mufassirin came up with a different interpretation. For example, that Qatada mentions and says that the Prophet was, or Ibn Abbas narrates and says, the Prophet would eagerly move his tongue to grasp the Qur'an out of his love for it and desire to retain it, fearing that he might forget it. Meaning that as revelation Jibreel would bring it, our Prophet would be reciting with it out of the fear that if Jibreel stopped speaking, that he would forget the verse that was being mentioned. And here Allah is instructing him that no, that won't happen. Don't worry about it. You don't have to recite along. Allah will protect the message. According to Sayyid ibn Jubayr, he said that the Prophet moved his tongues and lips to memorize the verses even before Jibreel would finish delivering the revelation. So Allah gave him the instruction, don't worry about this. I will make sure that you don't have to be hasty with this and you'll receive the revelation. The most logical of all of these and most consequential in tie is not to say the fact that the Prophet, Na'uzubillah, was afraid that he would forget the message and therefore he was repeating it, but rather that he had a desire to share the information he possessed and the guidance he possessed with the hope of offering assistance to humanity, that he would be in haste to go and to announce these verses before their time came. 17th verse says, Inna alayna jam'uhu wa qur'ana. Indeed, upon us is to put it together and to recite it. This being an elaboration of the previous verse where it's being told to the Prophet, don't be hasty, don't move your tongue and be quick and be hasty about this recitation of this Qur'an. The 17th verse says, it's not on you to make sure that this Qur'an reaches the people. Rather, inna alayna, that certainly it's on us to make sure, jam'ahu wa qur'ana, that the collection of this in its correct format and its recitation to be given to the people is Allah's responsibility, not the Prophet's. This verse becomes very interesting that from one aspect we see that Allah here, when He says Jam'ahu wa Qur'ana, its collection and recitation is upon Allah, is that today when we take a look at the order of the Qur'an, the structure of the surahs, the order of the system, it's not humanity that devised and decided how this will be laid out. Rather, Allah is saying, Inna alayna jam'ahu, that we are the ones who put it together in the structure that it's present. So meaning that the surahs that are present are not humanity's discretion of how they were set up, but rather it is Allah's discretion who put these together, and it is Allah who ensured that this Qur'an will be in the format that it was given to us. There is also the point in understanding that when Allah says, Inna alayna jam'ahu wa Qur'ana, that it is on us to collect it and to recite it, is that Allah is the one who protects the Qur'an. Allah is the one who ensures that the Qur'an is what it was intended to be revealed, and it's not up to people to decide was this a part of the Qur'an or not, but that Allah is the one who is the preserver of the Qur'an to ensure that it reaches us in its entirety. Hence this verse becomes very significant when applied to the context of the Qur'an, that those who question the validity of the Qur'an, they question Allah's command that is Allah capable of collecting the Qur'an? Is Allah capable of saving the Qur'an? And if He's made this promise and commitment in the Qur'an, who are we then to question and say that no, the Qur'an is wrong? If we turn and say that the Qur'an is wrong or something is missing, that means that Allah was not capable of collecting the Qur'an and ensuring that its recitation is preferred. The 18th verse continues, فَإِذَا قَرَأْنَاهُ فَاتَّبِعْ قُرْآنَهُ. And when we have recited it, follow its instructions. One of the meanings of this or interpretations of this verse, فَإِذَا قَرَأْنَاهُ فَاتَّبِعْ قُرْآنَهُ, that if we have recited it, then follow its recitation and its instruction, is that as Jibreel has conveyed it to you on our command, then follow its recitation, meaning recite it after Jibreel gives it to you in its completion and its entirety in its reading. Meaning that in time of when people should know about a verse is not something the Prophet chose as a designation, but rather was a revelation of when the people would be ready for it, and when it was given to him, then to share it with the people, not before then. So follow its recitation implies that one should act accordance with commands, including what is permitted and what is forbidden. That it's not sufficient for us, and Allah will use this verse to bear witness against us on the Day of Judgment. You said you follow Islam, but I commanded you to follow the rules of the Qur'an, why didn't you follow them? That for us, when we talk about the Qur'an, it's not just the attribute of reading the Qur'an, it's the attribute of applying the Qur'an in our life. These three verses, 16, 17, and 18, 16 where it says, do not move your tongue with it to hasten it. Indeed, it is up to us to put it together and to recite it. And when we have recited it, follow its instructions. Balkhi, one of the mufassirin of the Qur'an, came up with a completely different conversation, saying that these three verses are not actually referring to the Prophet and the revelation of the Qur'an, but rather they go back in context to the discussion that's happening prior to this of man on the Day of Judgment having his deeds and actions recited and announced. So Balkhi suggests, and he says that these don't refer to the Quran itself, but rather to people reading their own records on the Day of Judgment. That those who are reading their own book of deeds on the Day of Judgment will be the ones who are being given instruction that don't hasten the reading of this. Rather, we will put it together and tell you when to recite your deeds and your actions, and that you will be the one who sees the consequence of these actions of what it is that you used to read and what you used to do. So, a person should calmly review their record rather than rushing through it. And the intent is that on the Day of Judgment, the individual who sees their sins will become anxious. And they will be urged to be patient to understand the full proof against them and not to hasten themselves to a consequence. This is an interesting interpretation that Balkhi presents of looking at these three verses in another context. Is it possible that both are correct? That from the one aspect, this is a conversation about our Prophet not hastening to give the people the Quran and Allah protecting the Quran? Is it possible that there's a discussion of the book of deeds of those who are present on the Day of Judgment? Both are possible. And which is why when we read the Quran, we don't discuss in absolutes, as there are those elements that are hidden from us to know what their reality and meaning is. The final verse of our elaboration today, we mentioned the 19th verse, ثُمَّ إِنَّ عَلَيْنَا بَيَانَهُ. Then its exposition lies with us. The explanation lies with us. This statement has a number of different meanings that can be extrapolated from it. From one of the Mufassirin, it means that Allah will clarify what He has promised to do in the hereafter. That what Allah promises, that all of these different descriptions that we see of the Day of Judgment, all of the different attributes, items that we see, we sometimes get confused. How is it possible? I'll give you an example. In our previous surah, we were discussing how the people of heaven will have a communication with the people of hell. We imagine heaven to be way up there and hell to be way down there. How could it be that one up there is talking to one down there? The reality of how that action will come to be is what Allah is saying, ثُمَّ إِنَّ عَلَيْنَا بَيَانَهُ. To clarify and to explain what all of these statements mean is Allah's job, and He'll make sure that it's explained and understood, that all the realities that are described in the Quran that may seem conflictual, Allah will resolve them and explain them to it. Another interpretation by Qatada is that it promises that the Prophet of Allah will make the meaning of the verses clear so he can teach them to others. In reference to discussion around the Quran, that the Quran, ثُمَّ إِنَّ عَلَيْنَا بَيَانَهُ, that it's not on people to decide what it is that Allah is talking about in this Quran, but rather that the Prophet is the one who will elaborate and ensure that everything that Allah has described in the Quran is made clear. Hence we have these concepts of tafsir that go back and say, what did the Prophet do in his lifetime when a verse would be revealed to him? Another view on this issue is from Az-Zajjaj, in who he says that Allah will reveal the Quran in Arabic as a clear guidance for the people. That this use of the Arabic language and why the Quran was revealed in this language is so that the bayan, the explanation, there's no misinterpretation of what the intention Allah possessed when He revealed His Quran and these verses to us. Which points back to the reality that the more we understand the Arabic language, the better we understand the intent and the teachings of Allah that He has given us in His Holy Quran. This final interpretation underscores that the Quran has no hidden meanings and there's no cryptic messages, and that what is apparent within the Quran is what Allah intended. ثُمَّ إِنَّ عَلَيْنَا بَيَانَهُ, that the clarification of this intention of Allah is made in the Quran. Which is why there will always remain, and the first level of discussing the interpretation of the Quran is the literal translation of the Quran. And that what we interpret in the Quran should never be something that goes against the zawahir, the apparent of the Quran, because then that would imply that the entirety of the message is cryptic and its reality doesn't exist. Allah here is telling us that the Quran possesses a reality. It possesses something that from the apparent nature, every human being in every time has the ability to benefit from it. If we ever say that, no, Allah doesn't mean that when He wrote it in the Quran, then that's a lie. That the apparent meaning is the first meaning of understanding, and anything beyond that adds depth and value, but does not replace the original of the Quran. In this way, we see that this discussion around the Quran and its understanding and learning from the Quran continues to guide us and continues to give us instruction to turn back to the Holy Book of Allah and to turn back to this book of guidance that is both for us a source of instruction, a source of guidance, and a source of shifa on the Day of Judgment. We ask Allah by the rights of this day, by the right of the Hadirin Ghaibin, that, oh Allah, keep us on the upright path of Islam. Ya Allah, give us tawfiq to learn from and apply the messages of the Quran in our lives. Ya Allah, keep us and our children and our families attached to both the Quran and Ahlul Bayt. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Wal asr, innal insana lafi khusr, illa alladhina amanu wa amilu salihat, wa tawasaw bil haqqi, wa tawasaw bis sabr. Sadaqallahu al-aliyyul azim. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين ثم الصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ونبينا وحبيب إله العالمين أبي القاسم محمد اللهم صل وسلم على أمير المؤمنين علي بن أبي طالب وفاطمة الزهراء سيدة النساء العالمين والحسن والحسين سيد شباب أهل الجنة وعلي بن الحسين زين العابدين ومحمد بن علي باقر علم النبيين وجعفر بن محمد الصادق وموسى بن جعفر الكاظم وعلي بن موسى الرضا ومحمد بن علي الجواد وعلي بن محمد الهادي والحسن بن علي الأسكري وحجة الله يا ابن الحسن يا صاحب العصر والزمان اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد عجل الله تعالى فرجه وسحن الله تعالى مخرجه وظهوره وجعلنا من أعوانه والأنصاره والمستشهدين بين يديه اللهم اغفر للمؤمنين والمؤمنات والمسلمين والمسلمات الأحياء منهم والأموات تابع بيننا وبينهم بالخيرات إنك مجيب الدعوات إنك على كل شيء قدير صلى على محمد وعلى محمد أوصيكم ونفسي بتقوى الله. I enjoin upon you and myself to have fear and piety of Allah. The 31st chapter of the Holy Quran, known as Surah Luqman, talks about advices given by Luqman to his son. Luqman is not a prophet. But before Allah describes the advices that Luqman gave to his son, He says, وَلَقَدْ آتَيْنَا لُقْمَانَ الْحِكْمَةَ. And Allah describes and says, these advices that I'm sharing with you from Luqman, though he's not a prophet, is because Luqman was blessed with wisdom. And Allah pre-qualifies all of the advices that Luqman gives to his son, that these are advices of a wise man to his child, and if a parent chooses to be wise, pay attention to the advices of Luqman to his son. And this is why Allah discloses them in the Holy Quran. The first advice that Luqman gives to his son is, Ya bunayya la tushrik billah, inna shirka la dhulmun azim. The first advice, the first lesson a wise parent gives to their child is, O my son, la tushrik billah. Do not commit shirk with Allah. Do not make partners with Allah. Inna shirka la dhulmun azim. That certainly creating partners with Allah is a great oppression, a great mistake, and a great sin. I'm going to give you guys context for why this is an important conversation, but let's first talk about what is this shirk. This shirk, on its apparent nature, refers to the idea that don't let your children be polytheists. Polytheist literally, in its literal and then its figurative meaning. In its literal meaning literally means that don't worship someone other than Allah and say that this is a God and Allah is a God and that is a God and this is a God and so on and so forth. This requires conversation. We many times talk about that we don't want to inherit our faith, we want to earn our faith. Inheriting my faith is, I told my child you're a Muslim, but I never explained to him what does that mean. The most fundamental element of Islam that you need to talk to your children about is that the most important reason you're a Muslim is because there is one God, only one creator, and that everything in this universe shows you that there is only one source for everything that exists. If you just simply give them the dogma and give them the traditions, pray and fast and so on and so forth, but never go through the concept of explaining why all of this is important and how it is that this one Allah is present and He's communicated with us, that child will never truly develop an appreciation, but rather will only see other faiths as contrarian to his own, which is an incomplete way for a person to live their life. That I can believe that I'm better than you because I possess this and you don't, But tomorrow, if I have to justify and explain, what does it mean to be a Muslim, if that child can't explain it, he's just as likely to lose his faith. So which is why this explanation of that shirk is bad is first explaining and sitting down and talking about and learning that why do we believe God is one, and making sure that our children understand that the importance of believing La ilaha illallah, what does that mean? But the meaning of making sure La tushrik billah has even more of a responsibility on us than simply saying La ilaha illallah. لأنه شرك على قسمان الظاهر والمخفي. That polytheism and believing in more than one creator is of two types. One that is zahir and apparent, where I say this is my God and that is my God and this is my God. We may be able to protect our children from this simply by the society we live in. But shirk al-makhfi, the hidden shirk, is dangerous and difficult to overcome, and it requires investment in teaching. There are three types of hidden shirk that we may participate in our lives that we have to pay attention to and educate our children about. The first of these is referred to as that shirk which is done by showing off, by joining others in the worship of Allah. And what that means is that when I do the acts of ibadat, I say they're for Allah, but I want to look good in front of society. I want people to see me when I pray. I want people to appreciate me for all the good things that I do. And I want to use religion to raise my status in society. That people see me as a pious man. And that I worship better in front of people than I do in private. And in regards to this, we have a hadith from our Holy Prophet Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Someone comes to our Prophet and says, Ya Rasulullah, how do I obtain salvation on the Day of Judgment? And the Prophet replies, he says, salvation on the Day of Judgment, najat on the Day of Judgment, is that you should try not to deceive Allah, lest He returns your deception to you. And anyone who tries to cheat Allah will be cheated by Allah on the Day of Judgment. And He will take away his faith from him. And in this case, man will deceive his own self and he won't even know it. So they asked, what do you mean that a man deceives himself? Or a man tries to deceive Allah? How does a man deceive Allah? And the Prophet replied, he says, a person performs what Allah has ordered him to, but he is concerned about other than Allah when he performs the action. Teaching your children that when they do a good deed, don't worry if you're not appreciated by people. The natural reaction of a child and an adult alike is that I did something good. Acknowledge me. Appreciate me. Now, why aren't people noticing that I do all these good things? Or I don't want to do good deeds anymore because no one ever acknowledges all the good things that I do. When we look for acknowledgement from humanity, we've created shirk that humanity is my God that should reward me, not Allah. This is a very important lesson for a child because the child's natural reaction is, I did something, appreciate it. But you have to teach them that Allah is the one who truly appreciates, not humanity. We see, for example, that in the Quran, Allah makes a statement, فَمَنْ كَانَ يَرْجُو لِقَاءَ رَبِّهِ فَلْيَعْمَلْ عَمَلًا صَالِحًا وَلَا يُشْرِكْ بِعِبَادَةِ رَبِّهِ أَحَدًا. That Allah says, whoever hopes to meet his Lord, he should do good deeds and not join anyone in the service of his Lord. That this is an explanation of saying that your natural reaction is that people should appreciate when you worship Allah. We like people to know that we're pious. Allah is saying, stop worrying about that because that is a type of the hidden shirk, that person is who you're hoping for a reward from. You're hoping society will reward you. You're hoping that, for example, the community will reward you, instead of hoping that Allah will be the one who rewards you. The second type of shirk that's mentioned as shirk al-makhfi that you need to educate your children about is shirk through obedience. Allah in the Quran mentions, and we'll mention these briefly, and most of them do not believe in Allah without associating others with Him. In chapter 12, verse 106. In chapter 19, Allah says, and they have taken gods besides Allah that they should be to them a source of strength. By no means they shall soon deny their worshipping them, and they shall be adversaries to them. That these gods won't help you and you'll hate them eventually. He also says, they have taken their doctors of law and their monks for lords beside Allah. This type of shirk is where, for example, I look at the obedience of man over the obedience of Allah. That in this case, instead of worrying about that Allah has forbidden this action, I worry about the fact that, someone has commanded me to do an action against Allah and I prefer that action over the command of Allah. And that this is a type of shirk, to prefer the law of man, to prefer the command of society, to prefer the norms of community and custom. That if we don't have music at the wedding, it won't be a wedding. Why? Society won't accept it, they won't be happy. Or for example, that, oh, if we don't, for example, do this action, or if we don't, for example, wear the same dress, and though it may not have hijab in it, we won't be accepted in society. This is that aspect that I prefer the command of society over the command of Allah. And this is a type of shirk that Allah warns us against. In regards to this, we see a statement of our 5th Imam and 6th Imam, that this implies attributing partners in obedience and not in worship. That there are times where, for example, we say that the Ahl Kitab were the ones who did shirk. That shirk that's being discussed there is not the shirk of saying that there is more than one God, but rather saying that yes, there's one God, but we'll be obedient to Allah and be obedient to others as well too. Our 6th Imam also continues, attributing partners in obedience and not in worship is a type of shirk. A man obeys shaitan without knowing that, so he becomes a mushrik between Allah and shaitan, because we aren't paying attention to who we obey. The third type of shirk, which is important to pay attention to and to educate our children about, is shirk through seeking favors and support. Concerning this, Allah mentions in the Quran, He says, and most of them do not believe in Allah without associating others with Him. Our 5th Imam and 6th Imam explain and says, it is attributing partners to Allah in favors which are given to man. This happens when a man thinks in society that had it not been for this person today, I would have been destroyed. Had it not been for that lucky moment that I had, I would have been hit by that car. Had it not been for my foot slipping off of the brake pedal. That these favors that are being done to me by people, by society, by objects, I'm worshipping them. There's nothing wrong with the idea of saying that Allah blessed me with this opportunity, or had Allah not given me assistance through this person, I would have been in trouble today. But to simply attribute the goodness that I possess, the health, the safety that I possess to another, or seeking support from someone other than Allah, is shirk. This is really dangerous. Last week I was sitting with my brother and his kids, and they were talking about wanting to read Harry Potter. And I was like, hang on a second here. You have to talk about something like that. You can't just turn them over to the book. Because one of the consequences of that is it teaches a person to believe in something other than Allah to assist you in times of difficulty. Every time Harry gets into trouble, magic comes to the rescue. Someone else comes to the rescue. There's no God in that conversation at all. And what does it teach a child? It teaches a child that when I'm in difficulty, when I'm going through a hard time, when I feel like I'm Harry, I'm going to count on others to save me, not Allah. Now that doesn't mean don't let your children read things in popular fiction or what exists in the world, but always you have the responsibility to have a conversation. So that instead of relying on, for example, Superman, or relying on magic, or relying on dragons, or whatever else exists in the world of imagination, to be your source of favors and support, you're only counting on Allah. And a child needs someone to teach them that. We need to be taught that. That don't count on others, count on Allah. And that's the way that we get support. These hidden types of shirk are what Allah is indicating when He says to Luqman, and Luqman gives the first and most important advice, La tushrik billah, inna shirka la dhulmun adhim. That this creating partners with Allah is a great sin. It's a very bad thing. But we do it. We do it without realizing it. When we look to others to appreciate us and reward us, and we don't count on Allah to give us heaven. When we look to others to set laws and regulations that what will society say and do if we don't follow its norms. We look to others when we say that I'm counting on the help of Fulan bin Fulan, and had it not been for so-and-so, today I would have been in difficulty. The entirety of source we have to teach in our families is turn back to Allah first before we turn back to anyone else. We raise our hands again in dua and ask Allah by the right of this day, by the right of the Hadireen, Ghaibin, that, oh Allah, first and foremost, forgive our sins and cover our flaws. Ya Allah, we have gathered here with hajat by the right of the day of Friday, by the right of the teachings of Ahlul Bayt in the Quran, fulfill our hajat. Ya Allah, those amongst our families and our communities that are suffering through sickness and disease, give shafa'at to the mu'mineen wherever they are. Oh Allah, those who are suffering through strife and insecurity and difficulty, give aman and security to the believers wherever they are in this world. Oh Allah, keep our children on the upright path of Islam. Oh Allah, give our children tawfiq to truly believe in Tawheed and to follow the rules of Tawheed. Ya Allah, hasten the reappearance of Sahib al-Zaman. Make us and our families and our children from the upright supporters of Sahib al-Zaman. Entitle us to the ziyarat of Imam Hussein in this world and the shafa of Imam Hussein in the hereafter. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Inna Allah ya'muru bil-adli wal-ihsani wa ita'i dhil qurba. وينهى عن الفحشاء والمنكر والبغي يعظكم لعلكم تذكرون صدق الله العلي العظيم